Thank you all for joining us. I'm sure we've got a few more people joining in the coming minutes. But yeah, thank you for taking time out of what I know for everyone is a very, very busy Zoom schedules, very, very quickly filling up. Basically, the genesis of this discussion was, well, Nurani and I chatting about the fact that we are now seeing all of our events, the meetings where we would have, many of us on this call, met up personally, moving online. I think we're all aware that that's by necessity and hoping that it would be for not too long, for a relatively short period. But the indications are that certainly in terms of bigger international events, we're going to be in this situation for quite a while to come. And so that raised some questions, basically about how our communities operate, what this means for, well, what our communities do and what their value is to each of us in our different roles. I think we sort of see positive aspects to this change. We see absolutely the potential to reach many more people, to include many more people, but we also see potentially negative aspects in terms of not being able to have the kind of face-to-face discussion that many of us find very valuable and that many of us use for business, that is really central to solving some of the issues that our forums have been set up to solve. So I think when we're in normal times, when we're having these events, we don't necessarily stop and analyze exactly what it is about the events that we have that makes them so valuable, that makes them work. We're now in a position where we're having to do that analysis. And this event, this meeting, is hopefully part of that discussion as we consider what it actually is that we're looking to retain, capture when we take these large events online and have to have our engagement only in a virtual sense. We have a largish group here of people, many of whom I know personally, and many of whom are in positions who've got a lot of experience in this area, and positions of trust and authority in the communities. So hopefully this will be a bit of an interactive discussion. I think there's going to be a lot of people with perspectives here, and I think if we can try and get some of those into the discussion, that will be really useful. But in terms of formatting, what we'd like to do is start off with our 5 speakers, each of whom are involved in different communities, and can talk a little bit about their approach and what they've seen as valuable and tried to retain and build into their virtual events. In terms of ground rules, I just ask maybe keep your mics muted if you're not speaking. And as we move into the more open discussion period, we will, can you please use the raise hand function, which you find under the participants section here. I'll be watching that. I think Nurani will as well. So the 5 speakers that we have Alissa Cooper, who's chair of the Internet Engineering Task Force, IETF. We have Fergal Cunningham, who's the acting chief communications officer for the RIPE NCC. Sandra Hoferichter, who's the EuroDIG Secretary General. Edward McNair, who's the executive director of NANOG. And Adam Peake, who works in global stakeholder engagement for ICANN. So I'm sure each of those people will introduce themselves a little bit more when they speak. And we're going to kick off with just some brief comments, interventions from each of those people. So, and sorry, my name's Chris Buckridge. I'm head of external relations for the RIPE NCC. I'll be moderating this along with Nurani Nimpuno, who is head of global engagement with LINX. So back to our speakers. I think the plan is easiest way is just go through in alphabetical order, which would mean, Alissa, if we can throw to you first.
Sure. Yeah, happy to kick us off. Thank you so much for organizing this and for including me and the IETF perspective in this discussion. So I think as most people know, the IETF is a standards development organization. And as a result of that, our meetings are really working meetings. So we have, at any given time, hundreds of internet drafts that the thousands of IETF participants are churning through, trying to progress working through our 100+ working groups. And we really use the meetings as means to just accelerate the progress of that standards work. So it's less about kind of big picture presentations and very much about like advancing individual drafts and individual technical discussions. And yet having the meetings is very much sort of puts a forcing function around the standards process. We create deadlines. You see lots and lots more activity in the vicinity of the meetings than you do at other times of the year. So it's very much an important part of our process, even though we can run the process entirely without the meetings and still continue to produce internet standards. So there's definitely been, I think, a feeling of loss of not having the face-to-face meetings. We canceled our spring meeting just 3 weeks before it was due to occur in March, and we haven't had a full plenary meeting of the IETF since, because we tend to meet in March, July, and November. And so our real first large virtual IETF event will be upcoming in a few weeks at the end of July. We did do a virtual event in March when we had to cancel the face-to-face meeting, but it was substantially pared down. We focused on just a selection of new working groups and birds of a feather sessions that are intended to form new working groups. So the schedule was significantly reduced, and that was because we had very, very little time to plan what the meeting was going to look like. But really looking forward to the July meeting. It will have a much fuller agenda and still have a condensed schedule in time due to time zone difficulties, but we'll try to cover a lot more ground as we normally would at a face-to-face meeting. I think from my perspective and looking at how the work of the IETF has progressed in the last few months, it feels very early. It feels very much like we're at the very beginning of understanding the effects of the pandemic and the travel disruptions on the IETF community itself. I know there's like it's sort of like human nature to want to draw conclusions and say like, well, this is what's going to happen. This is what's happening already. This is what's going to happen. But I think it's actually very difficult to draw any of those conclusions, in part because the pandemic is so disruptive generally to people's lives that there's those factors as well that we can't really see. It's not like we're surveying people to understand what else has been going on with them in the rest of their lives. But I do think that that has factored into how much we actually process, and are we seeing a little dip in the production and approval process of internet drafts as a result of that? Who knows? Like we can't really draw conclusions. I do think this is going to be a common theme, and Chris, you already touched on it, that a lot of standards work gets done in the hallway at the meeting, at the bar, over food, around a whiteboard. A bunch of people sitting around their keyboards trying to hash something out, those informal conversations, and even planned gatherings that usually happen on the sidelines of the IETF meetings are a lot of the places where the real work gets done. And so trying to figure out how to recreate some of that in a virtual environment is very important and also extremely challenging. And I know that we're all sort of sorting through that hallway experience or those informal experiences and trying to figure out how we can support them. But in my mind, that's like really the big question, because so much of our work, the prep work and the pre-work and those really difficult discussions, they don't happen in the working group meetings. We have a lot of difficult discussions in the working group meetings, but a lot of them happen on the sidelines before and after. And so looking at how do we, what happens there, like what happens with that aspect, I think will be interesting to see as we move forward. So I think I'll leave it there and turn it over to the next person.
Thank you. That's some good perspectives there already, and I think we'll dig into a bit further into some of the things that you brought up there. Adam, so coming from the ICANN community, you've now moved 2 meetings online. Would you care to share some of your experience with that?
Yeah, sure. And I hope you can hear me. Adam Peake, and as mentioned, I work for Global Stakeholder Engagement for ICANN. So last week we held ICANN 68, which should have been in Kuala Lumpur, And I guess a lot of us who would have attended it would now be in Koh Samui or something like that on a beach. So that is one of the pains of moving to virtual. And the idea of an ICANN 68 is it obviously signifies that this was the 68th ICANN meeting. And it's worth noting that the first one was in Singapore, ICANN 1, ICANN 2 was in Berlin, ICANN 3 was in Santiago, Chile. And the reason for mentioning this is that this global rotation of what we call community meetings, ICANN community meetings, we hold 3 a year, and we rotate them around the world. And this is part of the,
should we do lunch now?
This is pretty much essentially part of our DNA. It reflects the concept that the internet is a global medium, and the technical management of the internet should be global. It should be reflecting the diversity, global diversity of the users involved. So these meetings are not just for travel, they represent something very important to the sort of ethos of the organization and how we operate. So in addition to that, we hold, regular meetings, whether they're large or small, throughout the year. They can be domain name summits with 500 people, to sessions on technical training or capacity building for community groups, outreach that I do, say, to civil society groups and academia. And these go on all the time. And of course, all of these have moved online. And so there's a change in not just work pattern, but how we actually include people, how we seek new members and so on, new participants. And also providing information simply about how the DNS and how the internet works, which is particularly important at this time. People, as you've noticed, are really rather interested in how they're getting online and staying online. We also have hundreds of community meetings each month. Policy work, as Alissa mentioned, it's what we do. It's the work of the organization, continues throughout. There are hundreds of meetings, and I suspect there are actually more now. And this is leading to real quite significant concerns over Zoom fatigue. Because, okay, you might be able to in normal times attend 3 or 4 meetings if you're a part of a working group. But when your whole working day has moved online, perhaps your interactions with your family, with your friends, with your community groups, Zoom fatigue is a very real thing and something we're not entirely sure we can solve. I don't think it is something we can solve. About the meetings we have held, ICANN 67 should have been in Cancun, Mexico, 7th to the 12th of March. And we moved this online really at the beginning of the sort of COVID outbreaks. It did mean that the technical staff were able to run it from the LA headquarters, while most of us were already working from home. And the community decided to reduce the number of sessions. And this goes to the point about really where the real work of the organization is done. We cut it down from a typical community forum, which is what we call the first meeting of the year, would have about 275 sessions, 500 hours of sessions you would have expected had you gone to Cancun. We cut that down to 65 sessions of 93 hours. And that's a very significant difference. The sessions that were lost were those cross-community working groups. It was the internal discussions between those who do the work throughout the year. So yes, we're losing a lot of, or I suppose it's really my first question would be, are we or should we be concerned about the sense of a loss of community within our respective groups? We in ICANN talk about community a lot, and it's really something that is felt by the people who participate. So are we at risk of losing that sense of community? Will that affect the work we do? The other thing, and I think many people on this call will know, ICANN is extremely complex in its organizational structures. There are policy advisory groups, and there are advisory groups and policy development and constituencies. There are many of them. And when they're meeting online, they tend to meet among themselves, or they tend to meet on a particular topic. So are we risking a sort of emphasis on the silos that are designed in? The meetings encourage us to get out of those silos, to go into random sessions, because there are 275 of them, say, in potentially a typical Cancun meeting. But we don't do that. So are we risking a sort of siloization, horrible new word I might have invented, or Chris did, I don't know. Are we sort of risking an echo chamber, as we sort of talk about in our social media, moving into the work that we do online as we try and develop policy and compete, and the work that we do in our respective organizations? So that's something I'm interested in, and ICANN as an organization doesn't have any answers about that for sure. Very quickly about stats, and then I'll stop.
Very quickly.
Yeah, very quickly. Okay, so basically we're seeing the same numbers, online and offline. 1,752 attended ICANN 67, and the comparable meeting the year before in Kobe was 1,759. So a difference of 7, it's nothing. But the number of sessions, you know, the highest participation for ICANN 67, not surprisingly, was the org PIR sale discussion, and there were 896 participants for that, which is a lot. I mean, that's a lot of people online. 650 was the next highest, and there were 13 sessions between 300 and 425. A statistic I'll stop with is what we found from the ICANN 67 meeting in March, was that there were 161 people accessed using, cellular 3G data as their means of access. So what does that mean for people's experience of an online meeting? It suggests that they're using only a mobile phone, and we do have information about the iOS used and so on. But it also means that you have to think about data plans. If these people are in developing countries where there can be a significant outlay to actually up your data plan for a couple of gigabytes to attend an ICANN meeting, that's going above and beyond volunteering in some cases. It's a very tangible expenditure that people are making. So these are some of the things we're concerned about and thinking about. And one of the final sessions at the ICANN 68 meeting last week was about engagement. How do we move forward? How do we start talking about going back towards meetings, whether they're regional, sub-regional, national, and one day back in all together in a nice place somewhere around the world. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you very much, Adam. Yeah, some very interesting points, but I want to keep rolling as quickly as possible here. Edward, can we turn to you?
Yes, I'm Edward McNair. I'm the executive director of NANOG. NANOG is the oldest NOG and probably the largest of the NOGs. We're an interesting organization that we're educationally focused. We also have a relatively small team, yet we do have a pretty good reach across being based in North America. NANOG's focus is primarily educational, and the secondary function is the social aspects of it, where deals are done, where people are meeting, interacting with one another. So in terms of the educational piece, it was pretty straightforward to deliver it. Fortunately, I'd run organizations that delivered technical services for different organizations within the internet space. So I had an understanding of how to go through and deliver said product. The question was, what was going to be the best fit for an organization like NANOG? We found a partner that was able to facilitate the work that we needed. In terms of the social aspect, we had a very lively chat session that went on during the events. We had other social breakdowns and hours, such as we had normally do a women in tech session. We do newcomer sessions. All of those things we facilitated through a virtual space. Does it replicate or reproduce what you would normally find in a typical meeting? Of course not. And I don't think you'll ever will be able to do it. But I think that what you can do is have an expectation of what you can achieve and what you cannot achieve and work within those parameters. We were always planning to move into a virtual space. This just accelerated that. We had been webcasting our events for years. We have an archive of content that goes back, close to more than a decade. And so fortunately, again, doing the webcasting, all those things made moving into the digital space and virtual space a little easier. We learned a lot, and we're trying to apply those things to deliver a better product for our customers. One thing we did notice that in terms of attendance, typically at a NANOG meeting, we'll have between 950 to 1,400 people attend. We had 2,100 registrants for our virtual event, and we ended up having about maximum of about 1,500 in a session. So from that regards, we feel that it was relatively successful. I'm excited about the potentiality of extending the reach of NANOG. We would have our meetings traveling throughout North America, United States, Canada, and pick a different location each time for our 3 events. Diversity, inclusion, reaching out to broader communities, especially those who don't have the resources or typical access, is very important to us as an organization. And I believe that moving into this space and having the interactivity will allow us to extend our reach and to reach more communities, especially underserved regions within North America. So all in all, I said it's been a good experience for us, and we're looking forward to expanding ourselves more in the virtual space.
Great, thank you for that. I know, Fergal, I'll turn to you because I know that you have similar thoughts also when it comes to the opportunities with virtual events and reaching not just more, but also new participants. Do you want to give a very quick introduction to your, share your experience with the RIPE meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. I do share a lot of what Edward has put forward there. So I work for the NCC, so we're the RIR for Europe, Middle East, Central Asia, but we're also the Secretariat for the RIPE community, and we do 2 RIPE meetings a year, and we get about 800 people usually attending those. So we worked together with event tech teams, as well as the RIPE chair, the program committee, and working group chairs to kind of put all this together for RIPE 80 in about 3 months. And I'm actually really happy with what came out of that. So it's kind of amazing to me that only 3 months ago we were debating whether we'd cancel events or have them. And I think one of the reasons I'm incredibly positive about virtual events is that for me the comparison is not between virtual and physical, it's between virtual and no events, because at the moment events aren't possible. So there's a lot of talk about physical versus virtual. Are serving a huge service to the communities and kind of keeping everything moving along while we're in this situation. For us, for this virtual meeting, we got 2,000 attendees rather than 800, which I think is huge. And you know, we're part of the numbers community, but for me, numbers really matter because we talk about diversity and inclusion. And if only a certain percentage of those extra 1,200 come back next time, I'm really happy with that. That's an achievement. And I do think another thing I noticed is that, for instance, our DNS working group is doing asynchronous meetings now. So every month they're meeting rather than just at every 6 months at a RIPE meeting. And I think this is great because it keeps our community going year long. And I think if we were going to have this type of discussion about the meaning of events in our communities, this might be a BOF at a RIPE meeting, it might be a side meeting at NANOG. We certainly wouldn't be all in a room together, and we certainly wouldn't be doing it, for me, 3 weeks after a RIPE meeting. So there's something there in that we're spreading the load in terms of community, and we're keeping this digital engagement going on. Some big lessons I have, I kind of feel, and Alissa might have mentioned this, but this is so new for everybody. And I kind of think of, we're switching to a whole new medium. And it kind of reminds me about what Marshall McLuhan said about how every new medium tries to replicate the previous one. And I feel like we're a bunch of stage actors who are trying to replicate, you know, reading our lines on a podium and trying to put that on virtual. But yeah, I think things are going to change in unexpected ways. And the other thing I want to say is, I think for our physical events, the organizers take a huge load. We lay everything on. We tell you when to start. We tell you where you're going to have coffee. We tell you where you're going to have a beer with people after the session ends. We tell you everything, and it's all laid on for you. Now I think we're putting the burden on the attendees, and you know, we're part of the community. We all have to come together for these events, but now it's on the attendees. Are they going to go the extra effort to engage with people? You know, it's not so easy to meet new people online maybe, and it's not so easy to have good chats with your old friends, but I think you're going to have to if you're going to keep this community going. So that's a little bit of a switch in where the burden lies. And also, I kind of think we will go back to physical at some stage, I hope, but we've raised the standards in terms of virtual. But what are physical meetings going to do when we go back to physical? Because we have this period where we're going to attract new audiences. Like Edward said, audiences are going up and we can reach anyone, anywhere. So if the content is good, people will come. And there's an obligation for us to provide good content if we want people to stay switched on. But when the physical meetings come back, you know, Adam mentioned Zoom fatigue, and we've scheduled 45-minute sessions. Are we going to go back to 90-minute sessions and forget about the virtual audiences and online fatigue? So I think whatever happens, things have changed and they're not going back to the old way. So yeah, to sum up, I'm really positive, and I think we have an opportunity, and if we're positive, we can really make something of this this experience.
Thank you very much, Fergal. Yes, I don't want to just detract or distract from any of our speakers, but I just want to note there is some also really interesting discussion going on in the chat here. So I think we're all learning to use Zoom in that way, but definitely points that it would be good to come back to in the discussion later on. But just moving now to our last speaker, which is Sandra Hoferichter. Sandra.
Thank you, Chris, and also thank you for giving the opportunity. Am I allowed to share my screen with everyone, or because I see the function is on?
I think it's possible, yes.
Okay, then I will do it in a minute. I'm speaking for the European Dialogue on Internet Governance. It's one of the regional IGFs, and we have the dialogue in our name because we take the dialogue and the interaction very literally and very important. Not with a physical and not with a virtual meeting, also with a physical meeting. The challenge for us was that we began our process in October last year already with the call for issues, and then with the preparation process, and org team basically had been started already doing their work and preparing the sessions when we had to take the decision to move from a physical to a virtual meeting. So the challenge here was really, what are we going to do with the program? Because we didn't want to throw away any work that has been invested already, and because that would be upset for the community if they invested work and then they are going to be told, oh, by the way, your session is not going to happen. So this was one of the biggest challenges we had to face when taking the decision. I will soon show you some numbers on how this was solved. What we realized, we had a very big disbalance between the number of registrations, which was double as what we would have for a physical meeting, 1,200. But we never had 1,200 people in the session. I don't even think we had 1,200 people overall attending. I think many registered and then forgot about it, or registered just to see how we are doing, or I don't know what happened. Anyway, no session had much more participants than, let's say, 100. But we realized that streaming in addition to Zoom is a very important thing. Sometimes even half of the people being in the Zoom room attended then also on the streaming. For whatever reason, I think it's legitimate. I just want to follow the discussion and do my emails here, and I don't have to be in the virtual Zoom meeting room. I think that's something we should take into consideration when thinking about how people used to attend meetings. I also concur with my previous speakers that it's a big boost for remote participation. The community is constantly learning. I mean, what I like here on this meeting is that almost everyone has switched on the camera, because it's a totally different feeling when you talk to other faces instead of to black boxes only. So I really appreciate that, and I think this will become more and more common. Also, the audio equipment is really important. People are learning here as well that you need to really give others a good experience when you are intending to participate, so that it's not tiring, and it's basically a pleasure to listen to you. We are experimenting with virtual backgrounds. I see there was a big booth at the beginning. Now this is going down. I also think that everything that gives us a little bit of a glimpse into your living room or wherever you are is something that is appreciated, because if you don't have the person virtually, physically in front of you, it is at least a little bit of something that you give from yourself, and that you tell about yourself when you allow them to look into your space. So that's something I personally appreciate very much. For EuroDIG, I must say the networking aspect did not work, but it was also not so much missed. I mean, there was no one who said, oh, by the way, I missed the network. Of course, they missed the physical networking, but no one expected us to do some big networking events online. I think we had the feeling everyone was happy to switch off the camera at some point and go and grab a coffee or do something else. In terms of numbers, and now I would like to share my screen with you. We just closed the survey on the weekend, and I would like to highlight some numbers with you. First of all, a question was it a good decision to move to the cyberspace? Everyone was of the opinion, yes, that was a good decision. And the question on how much did everyone attend, a majority of people attended only on selected sessions. We should not expect that everyone is participating in the entire event, but being frank, even with the physical meeting, this was not the case in the past. We could see that people are participating only one day, only half a day, and so we should not expect that to be different in the virtual space. I said already that a significant number is using the streaming or a combination of stream and Zoom, so I think we have to put effort in this. For EuroDIG, we put effort into the stream in this respect that the main session that went into the streaming, we curated them. We did not send them directly from the Zoom room, because then you might have a different setting with the little windows. But what we did, we curated them, we put the name underneath a speaker, and this was a little bit more of an effort, but it gives the streaming a much better experience than if you would only stream directly from the Zoom room. I think that's an important takeaway. Then I said already the program was discussed within our community. Usually we have a 2.5 days program, 2 full days and half a day of a day zero. And the question was, are we going to keep that format, yes or no? And what we basically did, we only deleted some workshops that were at a certain stage not very well prepared, but we kept everything else, and it was basically exactly the same program structure that we are doing since 5 years, I would say. And our question in the survey was the program just right? Was it too packed, or was it too lightweight? And also, would you have preferred it stretched over a longer period or condensed to 1 day, or was it just right? And I'm surprised to see that basically we took the right decision. A big majority said the program was not too packed, not too lightweight, it was just right in terms of content and amount of sessions. And also the decision to do it like a physical meeting, 2.5 days, not stretched and not condensed, was obviously also preferred by a majority of people. I think this is a key takeaway, and by the way, we will share our takeaways with the broader community in a report that also consists of some how to do things and the financial aspect, what you basically need, because we had 3 studios. We had the headquarter in Leipzig where everything was set up from a technical side, but then we assigned hosting rights to 3 parts in Europe, 1 in The Hague, 1 in, by the way, The Hague was with the great help of RIPE NCC, 1 in Trieste and 1 in Berlin. And these studios basically were also our fallback option in case something happens with the internet connection, so that these studios could basically take over and at least run the session. And here, this was a novelty we did with these 3 studios, but there was a moderation in between those 3 studios. It was kind of a little bit of a Eurovision Song Contest when we had to go back to Studio Berlin, back to Studio Trieste, and always exchange with the moderators of these studios. And here, because this was a little bit of the costly part of our effort, and we asked the question, do you think if the moderation between the studios was useful? And you see that 88% of the people, nearly 100% of the people answered yes, this was useful. I think this added a little bit of a atmosphere, of a community atmosphere, and I think that was one of the biggest success of the virtual EuroDIG. And I mean, it was not a big effort. It was me moderating, and I'm not a professional moderator. It was just a little bit connecting the dots and giving everyone the community feeling across Europe. And possibly this is something that other event organizers might also think about, to distribute the workload first of all a bit, but also to give it more a feeling of we are the community spread over a certain area. And I stop here to answer questions.
Thank you for that very thorough description of the EuroDIG experience. There are a few very interesting points I thought I'd pick up on, and maybe we can dig a little bit deeper into those. I think Alissa particularly talked about that it's early days and that it's very difficult to draw any conclusions at this point, but I think also in terms of that it's most of us have organized maybe 1 or 2 events, and so we're still all in the learning phase. There are a few points also about diversity and inclusion. I think it was interesting to see that, you know, and I think almost everyone reported that there were so many more people participating, but also that there were new people participating in the meetings. And that's very interesting. But then, of course, there are also technical challenges, and those of us who have the luxury of good home interconnection, then we might be participating on in an easier way than some who have got limited bandwidth. And then I think, you know, in relation to that, you also talked about the social aspect, and not just because we're social creatures and we like to see each other and physically hug each other, or we like to drink beer, but there's something else that happens when we see each other physically. And I'd like to throw that question on someone as well, because I think it was something that was brought up in the RIPE community as well, that the hallway meetings are so important. It was amazing to see how easy it was to give presentations virtually. That was almost seamless, almost more pleasant than watching someone on a scene somewhere. But what does it mean that we lose that social aspect? Apart from that we enjoy it, all those hallway discussions, what does that mean also for inclusion and diversity? If we're a little clique in that community, we might be the ones having those hallway discussions or taking those sensitive discussions sort of into a corner of the bar. But first of all, there might be people who are never part of those hallway discussions, even at a physical meeting. But does it also mean that we sort of recognize that those who participate remotely, they will never get access to that aspect of it? How do we meet that challenge of including new people into our community? And then I'd also like to hear your thoughts on not just this first experience you've had of organizing a meeting, but if there are challenges that we need to address in the coming year that we think we've failed to address with our virtual meetings. There are a few things packed into that. Does anyone want to jump on one of those questions?
I guess I can start. I'll chat a little bit about the aspect of diversity and inclusion. First of all, when you have a meeting like our NANOG meetings, there's a price of entry. You've got your flight to get there, there's your hotel expenditures, there's the registration expenditures, and only the affluent really can attend a meeting unless it actually comes to the town that you're into. And so I think this is a great opportunity to be able to reach communities and people who probably couldn't necessarily attend a NANOG event. And it's a big ask to be able to fly to a city and make that financial commitment without being certain as to whether you're going to get the benefit directly coming back to you. I think the other thing that we ran into a challenge is junior engineers. At NANOG, we talk about the back room, side room conversations that happen. Well, there's a lot of poaching that goes on as well as there in terms of finding new employees. So oftentimes organizations won't let their junior engineers go out of the fear they're going to get poached. So this creates an opportunity where they can attend, participate in a NANOG meeting, get the educational benefits, and it's a security to the employer that they won't get poached. And again, I think in terms of diversity, we're trying to do more outreach towards students. And this is also a great venue to make that happen. Smaller communities where NANOG wouldn't normally go because of the size of those communities. So I think it's a great opportunity. I think we will go back to hybrid meetings at some point in time. Virtual will always be a part of what we do in the future. But I think this is something that allows us for a broader reach, and hopefully these people will get engaged through the virtual space. And then when NANOG swings around and is closer to them, they'll see the value and the desire to participate directly in a meeting.
Yeah, great, very interesting. And I don't know if Adam, Alissa, or Fergal want to comment on this sort of the hallway discussions and policy shaping, or in your case, standards creation. Yeah, Adam, please.
I think something that I thought of looking at how we reduce the number of sessions so that we could put them online. If you think that if you're reducing from a couple of hundred sessions down to 50 or 60, the sessions are interesting, you follow them online. But if we'd been in Kuala Lumpur last week, and Nurani, Alissa, there's a lot of you who go to ICANN meetings, when your session isn't going on, you may have a hallway conversation, or you might just go and pop in and see what the Government Advisory Committee is doing. You might go and see the board meeting with another community that you don't meet. Not only are you learning about different sets of issues, but you're meeting different sets of people in the room. Just to sort of tangent on that, one of the things that I find with Zoom is that it takes a lot more concentration. You're looking at a very small piece of glass real estate. You're listening through a single audio channel, and so you don't have the opportunity to turn to your seatmate and say, "What number did someone just say?" or whatever it is. And very often that little conversation can lead to another discussion as you walk out of the room. And, these accidental things that we do as human beings at physical meetings, these are part of interaction and society, and they're important. And particularly as we're forming, again, community, I think this is really something we're going to miss. I'm concerned about it. I don't think ICANN has a position, but having done this for 20 odd years or so, it really is something that I'm kind of interested to see where we go. What happens to the multi-stakeholder approach and the principles that we think about and things like that?
Yeah, I fully agree with that, Adam, and that serendipity, right? It's so hard to recreate serendipity when we're all stuck in our houses, no matter what kind of tooling you want to throw at it. It's just, having people physically co-located allows them to run into each other, and it allows you to run into a meeting that you wouldn't have otherwise known about in a way that is very difficult to recreate. I think there's another point that I wanted to come back to, which would be interested in people's thoughts, because it's a bit of a challenge for the IETF as a global organization. Fergal was talking about the shifting of the burden onto the attendees instead of the organizers, in terms of people knowing where they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to be doing at any point in time. And we had some people in our community when we started planning for our upcoming meeting saying, "Why are you trying to stuff all of these sessions into 1 week like you normally would, as if everybody's getting on a plane? Why don't you just let the working groups meet when they meet? They can set their own schedules. We already do this in between our plenary meetings. We have lots and lots of interim working group meetings on a normal basis, but why try to have the new medium replicate the old medium, as Fergal was saying." And I think the challenge for us as a global organization is you can say that, okay, it's just up to everybody. Each working group can organize its own meetings, and then they all end up in that same 2-hour window during the day, which is optimized for people from Pacific time all the way to China and Asia Pacific being able to meet, because there's really only a small window during the day when you can find that spread. Or some of them will be optimized much more for people who are in North American time zones or European time zones than they are for people who are in Asia. And what we end up with is a big slate of working group meetings, and half of the community is just so exhausted they can't join over months and months of these meetings because of their time zone. And so that was sort of a principle that came out of our initial planning process for our upcoming meeting, was to say, as the organizers, one thing that we need to try to safeguard is the fairness of the scheduling vis-a-vis time zones, because that's one thing that, if you disaggregate all the planning, may well be lost. If you let 200 working group chairs make their own decisions about scheduling, then inevitably this looking out for what does this make for the schedule for your average participant over time? Who's going to be doing that? So that's something that we've tried to do, but I don't know that that's really the right balance, like figuring out the time zones and this sort of equity of time zones for a global organization. It's very difficult to know what to do. And with our physical meetings, we rotate them geographically. You know, we do one every year in North America, one in Europe, and one in Asia. And it's exactly for this reason. But when you move online, there's a strong push by people to say, you know, just let people schedule when it's convenient. And it's like when it's convenient for you is not when it's convenient for me.
So we have around 15 minutes left, and I do want to throw it a little open to the floor. Fergal, I think you had your hand up. If I can ask, well, certainly people, if you want to raise your hand in the participants list, we can try and give you the floor. If I can ask everyone just to keep it quite condensed, concise from this point out, because I think it would be great to try and hear from as many people as possible. So Fergal.
Yeah, I do want to make the point that I don't think everything is for everyone. I think, for instance, LINX organized a 15-minute webinar yesterday. I thought that was really interesting. But once you've figured out how to run a Zoom meeting, you've pretty much nailed what you're going to do for the next meeting. So, you know, if you have 10 meetings a week, and I don't expect anyone to attend all those meetings, but I expect that some of those meetings will appeal to some people. And you know, we don't have to cater, we don't have to spend money on venues. Whoever shows up, and I think that's great. But on one of Nurani's questions, I think the hallway chat thing is very interesting, and how this helps with communities. Again, I think the burden may be on the attendees to be a bit braver about what they'll put online. I think if those hallway chats are worth having, maybe they're worth having in front of hundreds of people or thousands of people, because even at meetings, those chats are only for a few people. They're not for everyone who attends the meeting. They're for the 5 people you might meet and have a discussion about something. So I think it might take a little bit of a human change and a mindset change to address that. I don't expect it will ever be replicated virtually. So maybe people will have to think a little bit differently if they want to have those chats. And if they have those chats and 1,000 people are looking, maybe that's a good thing.
Okay, cool. We do have a couple of people in line here. I think I just do want to comment again on the discussion that's happening in the chat. I think there's some really good points being raised there, and certainly Nurani and I will take those into consideration and into the input that's sort of going to be the output that will be the output of this meeting. But a couple of things that I just would like to sort of comment on there. One of the points that I think Dinesh made quite early on was that we don't know what the demographics of these meetings are going to be going forward that we're in, and this builds on Alyssa's point that it's a very new experience. We're going to settle into new patterns if we keep doing this for a while going forward, and that's going to be really interesting. The other thing that, and Leo raised this, and this was actually one of the reasons I was really interested in this topic, is organizations like RIPE or like IETF have responsibility and accountability for actually setting standards, making policy. What does this new change actually mean for the legitimacy of those decisions? It changes who's involved in the decision making. It changes how the discussion takes place. Oh, do we still feel that accountability? I think that's something that the communities need to consider for themselves, and also consider how we communicate that to other stakeholders who are relying on us and seeing us as accountable. So I have two hands up. I'll go Wolfgang Tremmel first, and then Daniel. So Wolfgang?
Yeah, hey, hello. One aspect which hasn't been raised yet, also that somehow relates to the junior engineers, is got that input from a colleague. Well, I was able to attend the RIPE meeting kind of full-time. I blocked everything in my calendar and was able to attend. But I heard from a couple of colleagues, they were seen as being in the office and watching videos. So they can do other things. They can take phone calls. They can do project work because they are just in the office watching videos. If you are at a physical meeting somewhere, you are completely off, away from your day job, and you can concentrate on the meeting. So that's one other aspect I would like to raise.
And Daniel.
Yeah, what Wolfgang said, I think we need to create some consciousness and awareness that virtual meeting also takes time and energy and is worthwhile. The one thing that I'd like to bring in, I also brought it into the chat already, is maybe while we're sort of dealing with the pandemic and this sort of virtualization of everything, we should probably look at new forms somewhere between the virtual global meeting and the physical meeting in some location, and maybe find a mixture. I see this already, EuroDIG doing this, some others also doing it, but really for RIPE, I'd like to see something that has sort of regional or even local meetings where you can combine a physical meeting that is at the same time as the virtual sort of global meeting, and have smaller groups actually interact in person, and maybe also synthesize something that happens sort of in the hallway there. I'd really like to explore this a little, and I'm really interested in hearing experiences from people who are actually already doing this. So please mail me if you have a how-to or some accounts of experiences. I think that's a really good thing. As to the scheduling and the time zones, I'm really thinking maybe one should have a bid system where you basically have a coordinated schedule, and groups can bid for slots and get some sort of credit, the amount of credits, and the more popular slots get more expensive. Just do something like this might be my suggestion. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Daniel. Since we're getting very close to the hour, and we said we would focus on the future and on solutions, I'm going to ask the panelists or any other participant who's used to organizing meetings. So if we imagine, I think we recognize that we're sort of in this transition state at the moment, and we're still learning. And I think we also recognize that we've taken our physical meetings and tried to squeeze them into a virtual format. But as we're learning and developing, we might actually be finding completely new formats. So if we look to the future, if you're trying to imagine what an ideal community meeting for your community would look like, what formats, what tools and features, what are the main things that would work a lot better than not just the virtual meetings we have now, but than all our previous physical community meetings? Would one of you be able to sort of paint that scenario and give us that ideal meeting in the future?
I'll give you a kind of a question back to that. And for us as NANOG, what we're really wondering, what is the hybrid going to look like? How are we going to be able to take this virtual space, integrate it with a physical meeting, and still allow people who are remote to be able to participate, to be able to interact, to feel like they're part of the community, even though they're in the virtual space. So we're exploring those things now, but I think that's going to be a big question for the future. How do you integrate these two meeting formats?
Yeah, that's great. And I think Fergal actually made a comment of swapping it around and actually saying, how can you integrate physical meetings into virtual meetings?
Absolutely. I think I was kind of jumping on what Daniel was saying with the hubs, but maybe the virtual is the core hub of the meeting, and people from around the world are joining from physical locations. So we switched the mindset basically from what we have at the moment. But yeah, I think that could be an interesting possibility.
And this is something that I mentioned we sort of closed with last week at the ICANN 68, is how do we do engagement, which means how do we do meetings, how do we interact? And it was questions about, is there a pathway back to traditional global international conferences? But I think, as you say, it's going to be a hybrid. And would it be possible for some people in a region that feels COVID safe, which sounds like a political statement, where people can gather? Do we have a mix of online meeting with physical meeting? Does it work? Could it work? I do think that we need new tools. We seem to be forcing, 5 months ago, we use Zoom and we've used Adobe Connect before, but we're forcing these tools to do brand new things, whatever it would be. And they're adapting very, very well. But there's an opportunity there at NANOG and your guys to actually develop tools that we need. Because I don't think this is going to go away, not just because COVID may not go away, but because we're learning that this is absolutely a good way to work. It's an inclusive way to work, as you've been saying. So that the tools that develop off Zoom, off Teams, are going to be extremely important. But we would love comments.
Yeah, I know Sandra has her hand up, and I think probably you'll be the last point. But just on that point, Adam, I think another comment that we were discussing yesterday was, has this actually terminally disrupted that we previously had for these physical meetings, just in terms of the financing? And now that people have seen that remote is an option, are we still going to have the critical mass there to actually put on these big events, or is it going to really be a much different, really change the landscape even once we get past COVID? Sorry, Sandra, you've got.
I must admit, I'm rather negative about this. I think when we are back to physical meetings, everyone will be so hungry to see each other that the remote participants will feel, and I know this was a term Nurani used once, the ones that are at the meeting are like around the bonfire and the other ones are a little bit out, and I fear this is going to be, or this is going to happen again. I think what we could do is, but this is very much up to the individual, that the experience of participating, if you intervene in the session, is much better, that we really have the person on a big screen in the room, so that at least for that moment when the person is giving an intervention, it feels like the person would be in the room. But that also needs good equipment and well preparedness on the remote participation side. And I think here we all learned a lot about it. But honestly, I fear that when we have a physical meeting again, those that are in the room will be the kind of privileged ones, and the ones that are remote are a little bit outside, because the networking aspect and having a glass and everything and not taking the microphone all the time, that will pull off all the advantages. And also one thought I would like to put into this when we discuss resources, the hub thing is a nice thing to do, but basically it adds a lot to the cost, because you have to set up a mini conference setup and on each hub. I mean, if you have a group of 20 or 50 people, you need microphones, you need audio equipment, you need all that for every hub, and one has to be able to finance these kind of things. So it's, I wouldn't be too negative. I really hope that we will have experiences that we can take over to our future, but I don't think hybrid meetings and these kind of things will be the ultimate solution in the future. Sorry if I put water in the wine.
Thank you, Sandra. No, I think they're important points as well to bring up. I think sometimes we tend to paint things in black and white, and there are a lot of grey zones out there, and this is the continuous work. I'm afraid we have come to the top of our hour. There was so much so many interesting points brought up here, and I'd love to dig a little bit further into them. And so our thinking with this session was really to kickstart a discussion, not to come up with all the solutions and not to design the perfect meeting. I'm going to actually ask all the participants to give me a thumbs up, thumbs down, or a so-so if this is a worthwhile discussion taken forward. Thumbs up from most. Okay, well I think that means that there's a bit more work for us to do. If you are not speaking, could you please put yourself on mute? Thank you. Okay, well, with that, I'm going to say thank you to everyone for this discussion. And thank you particularly to the panelists, but also to all the participants. And I know that a lot of the participants here probably had a lot of things to contribute with, because I know a lot of you organize meetings yourselves, and a lot of you participate in many different type of community meetings, and have a lot of experience to share with that as well. So Chris and I will write up a little RIPE Labs article, and we'll try to capture all the comments that you've made in the chat as well. And hopefully that will kickstart discussions in the various communities. But we're also happy to host another discussion like this again later in the year, to see if there are learnings that are worth sharing, or new challenges that we have found. And with that, I'll hand over to Chris, and he will actually sum all this up with some very wise words and make all of us look smart and wise. So thank you, everyone.
I'm absolutely not going to do that. I'm just going to say thank you, everyone. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, Nurani. Yeah, I hope to talk to you all again soon. Stay safe, and thank you. Bye-bye.